Brumora sleep escure were part 1A the lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The rain had already been falling for hours. Not the loud kind of rain that demanded attention. Not the dramatic kind that rattled windows or frightened travelers. This rain was gentle, patient. It drifted through the night like a quiet lullaby, washing the world clean one tiny drop at a time. Far beyond the last busy highway. Far beyond the glowing cities. Far beyond the neighborhoods where people hurried through endless schedules. There stood an old lighthouse. It rested on a lonely stretch of rocky coastline somewhere along the northeastern shores of America. Very few people knew its name anymore. Old maps still remembered it. Old sailors still whispered about it. But modern travelers almost always drove past without noticing. Its white stone walls had softened with age. Its lantern still glowed each evening. Its wooden door still welcomed anyone kind enough to enter. And every night, no matter the weather, someone lit that lantern. His name was Elias. Most people would have guessed he was somewhere in his early 70s. His beard was silver. His sweater was thick and made of soft wool. His boots had carried him through thousands of rainy evenings. His hands looked weathered. Not because life had been cruel, but because life had been honest. Years of polishing brass. Years of chopping wood. Years of carrying lantern oil. Years of quietly taking care of a lighthouse that the world had almost forgotten. His movements were never rushed. Everything about him carried the peaceful rhythm of someone who had stopped arguing with time. Tonight, like every evening, he climbed the narrow spiral staircase. One careful step after another. The wooden stairs softly creaked beneath his weight. Above him, the lantern room slowly grew brighter. Outside, rain slid across the glass windows in delicate rivers. Inside, warm golden light quietly waited. Elias reached the top. He smiled the same small smile he had smiled for decades. Without saying a single word, he gently polished the enormous glass panels surrounding the lantern. One cloth. One slow movement. One peaceful breath. Every evening. Exactly the same. Not because anyone expected him to, but because consistency had become a kind of comfort. Some people found peace in music. Others found it in prayer. Elias found it in simple routines. Below, the Atlantic Ocean breathed slowly against the rocks. Each wave rolled forward, then gently disappeared into darkness. No wave hurried. No wave competed. Each simply arrived, then rested. The wind carried the scent of salt, wet pine, old cedar, and rain-soaked earth. It was a smell impossible to buy, impossible to recreate. It belonged only to quiet coastlines. Inside the small lighthouse kitchen, a black iron kettle rested above an old wood stove. Water slowly warmed. Tiny bubbles gathered near the bottom. Not boiling, just beginning. The fire crackled softly beneath it. Orange light danced across the old wooden floor. Shelves held simple things. Ceramic mugs. Small jars filled with dried herbs. Honey collected from nearby wildflowers. Handwritten journals. Old books with worn leather covers. Nothing expensive. Nothing unnecessary. Everything carried years of quiet use. Elias carefully placed fresh cedar logs into the stove. The flames answered with another soft crackle. Warmth slowly filled every corner of the lighthouse. Outside, the world remained cool and gray. Inside, everything felt safe, as though storms belonged only beyond the windows. A grandfather clock quietly marked another minute. Tick, tick, tick. Its rhythm blended with the rain. Neither interrupted the other. Together, they created something almost musical. Something slow enough that even breathing seemed to follow along. Elias poured hot water over dried chamomile flowers. Steam slowly rose. The scent drifted gently through the room. Sweet. Soft. Almost like warm apples after autumn rain. He wrapped both hands around the ceramic mug. Not because it was cold. Because warmth deserved to be noticed. He closed his eyes. Just for a moment. One deep breath. Another. The lighthouse felt alive. Not with noise. Not with excitement. But with quiet presence. Many years ago, this lighthouse had guided hundreds of ships through dangerous waters. Storm after storm. Winter after winter. Its light had saved countless sailors from hidden rocks waiting beneath dark waves. Now, large cargo ships relied on satellites, modern navigation systems, digital maps. Technology had replaced lanterns. Yet, the light still shone. Because someone believed it still mattered. Sometimes, the value of something wasn't measured by how many people noticed it. Sometimes, its value came simply from continuing to exist. The rain became even softer. Tiny drops tapped gently against the lantern glass high above. Almost like careful fingertips. The ocean answered with slow rolling waves. Far away, a foghorn sounded once. Long. Deep. Gentle. Its voice drifted across the water before disappearing into the mist. Elias smiled. He always liked the foghorn. It reminded him that somewhere, someone else was awake. He opened an old leather journal resting beside the fireplace. The pages had yellowed over decades. Each page contained only a few handwritten lines. Never long entries. Never dramatic stories. Only simple observations. The rain smelled sweeter tonight. The lighthouse owl returned. A seal rested on the eastern rocks. The first snow arrived quietly. Life. Captured in ordinary moments. Perhaps those ordinary moments had always been the extraordinary ones. A soft scratching sound came from outside. Elias looked toward the door. Then smiled again. He already knew who it was. Without hurry, he stood. Walked across the wooden floor. Turned the old brass handle. The heavy door opened with a familiar creak. There, curled beneath the small porch roof, sat a large orange cat. Its fur looked slightly damp. Its green eyes blinked slowly. Not frightened. Not demanding. Simply waiting. "Good evening, Oliver," Elias whispered. Oliver stretched. Walked inside. And immediately settled beside the fireplace as though it had always belonged there. Perhaps it had. Perhaps both of them did. Outside, the rain continued. The lighthouse continued. The fire continued. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, another tired soul would soon begin a journey toward a quiet light that had never stopped waiting. End of Part 1A. Brumora Sleep St. Part 2A. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The fire had settled into a slow, comforting rhythm. The bright flames from earlier had softened into glowing amber embers, each one breathing quietly beneath the cedar logs. Every so often, a tiny spark would rise, twist gently into the warm air, and disappear without a sound. Oliver, the orange cat, had already fallen asleep beside the hearth. His paws were tucked neatly beneath him. His ears twitched now and then, perhaps chasing dreams only cats could understand. Elias smiled as he watched him. Animals never seemed to hurry through life. They trusted warmth. They trusted silence. Perhaps humans had once known how to do the same. The rain continued its gentle conversation with the lighthouse windows. Each tiny drop traced a different path down the old glass. None competed. None rushed. Each simply followed gravity until another drop quietly joined it. Outside, the fog had grown thicker. The Atlantic Ocean slowly disappeared beneath a soft gray blanket. The horizon no longer existed. Sea, sky, cloud, mist, everything blended together. The world had become wonderfully simple. Elias wrapped another log in the fire. Its bark released the sweet scent of cedar as the flames welcomed it. The lighthouse filled once more with that familiar fragrance. Wood smoke, chamomile, old books, salt air, rain. A scent impossible to describe perfectly, yet somehow instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever found comfort inside an old home on a rainy evening. He carried his warm mug upstairs once more. The spiral staircase had become part of his body after so many years. He no longer counted the steps. His feet remembered them. At the very top, the lantern slowly rotated. Its beam swept across the sleeping sea. Again, and again, and again. Steady, reliable, patient. Every rotation whispered the same silent message. You are not alone. Far beyond the rocks, somewhere hidden inside the fog, a small fishing boat floated gently with the tide. Its captain had anchored long before sunset. There would be no fishing tonight. Only waiting. Only listening. Only resting beneath the quiet rain. The tiny cabin light glowed softly, not unlike the lighthouse itself. Two small lights, keeping each other company across the darkness. Elias rested one hand against the cool glass. Tiny droplets trembled beneath his fingertips. He remembered the first evening he had climbed these same stairs. He had been only 23. Young, strong, always believing there would be plenty of time. Time to travel. Time to become successful. Time to discover exactly who he wished to become. Life had quietly smiled at those plans. Instead, it had given him something much simpler. This lighthouse. These waves. These storms. These peaceful evenings. And somehow, without realizing it, they had become enough. Below, the waves rolled gently across smooth black stones, each one polished by countless tides. No stone had become smooth overnight. Year after year, wave after wave, tiny changes had shaped them. Elias often thought people were much the same. No single day transformed a life. Small moments did. Quiet routines, gentle kindness, simple mornings, peaceful evenings, tiny choices, made thousands of times. A distant owl called from the pine forest behind the lighthouse. One slow note. Then silence. Another note answered farther away. For several moments, nothing else moved. Even the wind seemed content to rest. The forest, the sea, the lighthouse, all breathed together. He opened another old journal. Not his own this time. This one belonged to the lighthouse's very first keeper. The leather cover had cracked with age. The handwriting looked careful, almost elegant. One page caught Elias's attention. It had been written more than 100 years earlier. Storms teach people to respect calm. Only 6 words. Nothing more. Yet every year, those words seemed to become wiser. The lantern continued turning. Its great lens bent light into a powerful golden beam that stretched endlessly across the mist. Somewhere, invisible beyond the fog, That light touched the ocean, touched silent waves, touched lonely boats, touched distant shores. Perhaps someone looked toward that light tonight. Perhaps someone smiled after seeing it, without ever knowing who kept it burning. Oliver slowly climbed the final steps and curled beside Elias's chair. He circled twice, then rested with a satisfied sigh. Cats possessed an extraordinary talent. They always seemed to know exactly where the warmest place in the room would be. Elias gently scratched behind Oliver's ears. The old cat answered with a soft purr, a quiet sound, almost hidden beneath the rain, almost blending into the fire below. Another tiny piece of the night's music. The lighthouse clock struck 10. Not loudly. Its deep bronze bell echoed only once through the stone walls. The sound drifted downward, then faded into the sea breeze. Time moved differently here. Hours felt softer. Minutes felt wider. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing insisted on urgency. Outside, the rain finally began to slow. Clouds drifted apart just enough for a single star to appear. Only one. Small, bright, patient. It reflected softly across the calm ocean. Elias always loved the first star after rain. It reminded him that clear skies never disappeared forever. Sometimes, they simply waited beyond the clouds. He extinguished the kitchen lantern downstairs. Only the fireplace remained. Warm orange light danced across the ceiling. Old photographs rested quietly upon wooden shelves. Images of sailors, storms, families, generations of lighthouse keepers, people who had come, served quietly, and left behind only kindness. Perhaps that was enough for any life. To leave the world just a little warmer than it had been before. The rain had almost stopped completely. Only the occasional drop fell from the roof. The ocean breathed slowly. The lighthouse glowed faithfully. Oliver dreamed peacefully. And Elias, wrapped in warmth, listened to the beautiful silence that only arrived after gentle rain. Somewhere beyond the sleeping sea, morning would eventually come. But there was no need to think about tomorrow. Tonight, the lighthouse was exactly where it needed to be. And so, perhaps, were they. End of Part 2a. Brumora Sleep Bestior Y Part 3a. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The night had grown wonderfully still. Not because every sound had disappeared, but because every sound had found its perfect place. The waves no longer crashed. They simply breathed. The wind no longer whistled. It wandered gently through the tall coastal grass, carrying with it the fresh scent that only follows a long, peaceful rain. The lighthouse stood quietly against the dark sky. Its warm lantern continued its slow rotation. Round and round. Without impatience. Without pause. The beam stretched across the sleeping ocean like a calm promise. Elias settled into the old rocking chair beside the fireplace. The chair itself had become smooth over decades of quiet evenings. Its wooden arms had been polished not by varnish, but by countless gentle hands. Each slow movement created the faintest creak. Forward, backward, forward, backward. A rhythm older than memory itself. Oliver barely lifted an ear. Even he had memorized the peaceful language of the rocking chair. Outside, clouds slowly drifted eastward. More stars quietly appeared. 1 became 3. 3 became 7. Soon the entire sky glittered with distant lights that had traveled unimaginable distances simply to arrive above one lonely lighthouse. Elias always found comfort in that thought. The stars never hurried. Some of the light reaching Earth tonight had begun its journey before he was born. Yet, it still arrived exactly when it was meant to. Perhaps people worried too much about being late. Nature never did. The old man reached toward the small bookshelf beside his chair. There were many books. Some about sailing. Some about weather. Some filled with poems. Others carried stories collected from travelers who had once stayed inside the lighthouse during fierce storms. Tonight, his hand rested upon a weathered blue journal. Its pages smelled faintly of cedar and sea salt. He opened it slowly. Inside, every page described a different season. Not with statistics, not with measurements, but with feelings. Spring smells like wet earth and hopeful mornings. Summer carries the laughter of distant gulls. Autumn teaches leaves how to dance before saying goodbye. Winter reminds every fire why warmth matters. Simple observations. Simple truths. Perhaps the most meaningful wisdom rarely arrived in complicated words. The kettle downstairs gave a soft whistle. Not loud. Just enough to remind him that fresh tea was ready. Elias smiled. He stood carefully. His footsteps echoed softly through the spiral staircase as he descended once more. The stone walls held the warmth of the fire. Even the air felt slower, almost sleepy. The kitchen welcomed him with familiar comfort. Steam curled lazily above the kettle. He reached for another handful of dried lavender. A little chamomile. Just one tiny spoonful of wildflower honey. Nothing measured. Everything remembered. His hands knew the recipe better than his mind ever could. He poured the tea into his favorite mug. It wasn't beautiful. Tiny cracks ran across the pale ceramic. The handle had been repaired years ago. Most people would have replaced it long ago. Elias never had. Some things became more precious after being repaired. Perhaps people did too. The warm mug rested comfortably between his hands. Outside the kitchen window, a single fox quietly crossed the grassy hillside. Its reddish coat glowed silver beneath moonlight. It paused only once, lifted its nose toward the sea, then disappeared silently into the forest. The lighthouse had many quiet visitors. Owls, foxes, deer, seals, sometimes even curious rabbits during early spring mornings. Life continued all around him, without noise, without announcements, simply existing. Back upstairs, the lantern continued its patient work. Its great lens reflected tiny stars across the polished brass. Elias gently checked every mechanism. The gears turned smoothly. The oil remained full. Everything worked exactly as it had the evening before. And the evening before that. There was comfort in reliability. People often searched for excitement. Yet, many hearts secretly longed for something much simpler. Something dependable. A place. Or perhaps a person. Who remained constant while everything else changed. The Atlantic stretched endlessly into darkness. Its surface had become almost perfectly calm. The waves rose gently beneath the moonlight, like slow breathing beneath a blanket. Elias leaned lightly against the cool glass. Somewhere beyond that endless water, families were sleeping. Children dreamed quietly. Hospitals stayed awake. Ships crossed invisible routes. Lighthouses like this one continued keeping watch. The world never truly slept. It simply rested in different ways. Oliver appeared once again. Without making a sound, he brushed gently against Elias's leg. The old cat looked toward the window, then toward the chair, almost as though politely suggesting, "Perhaps it's time to sit again." Elias laughed softly. "I believe you're right." Together, they returned beside the fireplace. The rocking chair welcomed them once more. Forward, backward, forward, backward. The flames had become smaller now, not fading, simply relaxing. Golden light flickered gently across the old stone walls. Each shadow moved lazily, like sleepy memories stretching before bedtime. Far away, a buoy bell rang softly across the water. One clear note. Then silence. Another gentle wave. Another quiet breath. The sound traveled slowly through the night air until it finally reached the lighthouse. Elias closed his eyes for just a moment. Not to sleep, simply to listen. The rain had ended. The ocean breathed. The lantern turned. The fire whispered. Oliver purred. And somewhere, very quietly, the whole coastline seemed to exhale together. For tonight, nothing more was needed. End of Part 3A. Brumora sleep STORY Part 4A. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The moon had climbed higher. Its silver light stretched quietly across the Atlantic like a ribbon woven from silk. The sea reflected it without effort. No wave tried to hold the light. No ripple tried to keep it. The moon simply gave, and the ocean quietly received. Elias often thought kindness worked the same way. The gentlest kindness expected nothing in return. It simply existed. The lighthouse lantern continued its endless circle. Its great beam crossed the calm sea every few moments. Light, darkness, light, darkness. Never hurried, never interrupted. Its rhythm had become as natural as breathing. Oliver had climbed onto the wide windowsill overlooking the eastern cliffs, curled into a perfect circle. His orange fur glowed softly beneath the lantern's warm reflections. Only the slow rise and fall of his breathing revealed he was deeply asleep. Outside, the coastline rested peacefully. Tall beach grass swayed with the gentlest breeze. Every blade seemed to move together, like thousands of tiny dancers following music too quiet for human ears. The rocks below still glistened from the evening rain. Tiny pools of seawater reflected stars like little mirrors scattered across the cliffs. Each one held its own tiny sky. Elias quietly wrapped a thick wool blanket around his shoulders. Not because he felt cold, because comfort had its own language. The blanket had once belonged to his grandmother. Its edges had been carefully stitched by hand. Over the years, the colors had faded slightly. Yet somehow, it had become softer. Perhaps, time had polished fabric just as gently as it polished people. He stepped onto the narrow balcony surrounding the lantern room. The cool night air greeted him immediately. It carried the clean scent of salt water, fresh pine, wild lavender growing between the rocks. and distant cedar forests still drying after the rain. Far below, the waves whispered against the shore. Soft, patient, endless. The sound reminded him of pages turning inside a favorite book. Never exactly the same. Always familiar. The stars seemed brighter now. Without clouds. The heavens stretched from one horizon to the other. Thousands upon thousands of tiny lights. Some burned with pale blue brilliance. Others glowed softly in warm gold. Some hardly seemed to shine at all. Yet together, they transformed the darkness into something beautiful. No single star tried to outshine the others. Together, they created the night. Elias leaned gently against the cool iron railing. The lighthouse stood nearly 100 feet above the sea. From here, the world appeared wonderfully quiet. The villages farther inland had already gone dark. Only an occasional farmhouse window glowed softly in the distance. Somewhere, a family finished reading bedtime stories. Somewhere else, an elderly couple quietly shared evening tea. Somewhere, a newborn finally drifted to sleep in gentle arms. The world felt connected, not through noise, but through countless peaceful moments happening all at once. A gentle breeze lifted the edge of Elias's silver hair. He closed his eyes, just long enough to listen. The ocean, the wind, the distant cry of a lone seabird, the slow turning of the lantern behind him. There was no silence, only harmony. Every sound belonged exactly where it was. Nothing interrupted another. Nature never argued with itself. After several peaceful minutes, he returned inside. The warmth embraced him immediately. The fire downstairs still glowed patiently, not demanding attention, simply waiting. He walked slowly down the spiral staircase once more. Each wooden step offered the same familiar creak, almost like an old friend quietly saying, "Welcome back." The kitchen smelled even sweeter now. Chamomile still lingered in the air. Beside the window, a loaf of homemade bread rested beneath a linen cloth. Elias gently cut one small slice, spread a little wildflower honey across its warm surface, then sat beside the wooden table. Simple food, simple evening, simple happiness. He believed complicated lives often forgot simple joys. An old record player rested quietly in the corner. Its polished oak cabinet reflected the fireplace glow. Carefully, he placed a record onto the turntable. The needle touched the groove. A soft crackle filled the room. Then, very quietly, a slow piano melody began. Gentle, unhurried. Each note seemed to leave space for the next. The music never tried to impress. It simply accompanied the night. Oliver's ears twitched once, then settled again. Even dreams seemed to enjoy the melody. Elias looked toward the fireplace. Above it hung an old painting of the lighthouse during winter. Snow covered every rooftop. Ice lined the cliffs. The lantern still glowed warmly against the storm. He remembered that winter. The snow had fallen for nearly 3 days. The roads disappeared completely. No visitors came. No deliveries arrived. Only the sea, the fire, the lantern, and peaceful solitude. Some people feared being alone. Elias had learned something different. There was a quiet difference between loneliness and peaceful solitude. One emptied the heart, the other gently filled it. Outside, the tide had begun to rise again. The sea slowly reached higher upon the rocks. Each wave arrived with perfect patience, never trying to arrive first, never disappointed when another wave followed. The ocean had all the time in the world. Perhaps sleep arrived the same way, not when chased, but when quietly welcomed. The lighthouse continued shining. The fire continued glowing. The piano continued whispering. And somewhere, far beyond the peaceful horizon, the first gentle dreams of morning had already begun to find those who needed them most. End of Part 4a. Brumora Sleep St. Part 5a. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The piano melody slowly faded. Its final note lingered gently in the warm room, almost as though it wasn't ready to leave. Then, only the fire remained. Its soft crackling filled the quiet spaces that music had left behind. Elias never rushed to play another record. Silence deserved its own time. Sometimes, the most peaceful sound was simply the absence of sound. The lighthouse seemed to breathe. Old wooden beams quietly expanded and settled as the warmth from the fireplace traveled through every room. The stone walls held the day's remaining heat. The windows reflected tiny orange flames dancing behind Elias. Everything inside felt wonderfully alive. Not through movement, but through stillness. Oliver stretched lazily. One front paw reached forward, then the other. His back arched gently before he jumped from the windowsill onto the braided wool rug. Without hesitation, he wandered toward the bookshelf. Not because there was anything new to discover. Cats simply enjoyed visiting familiar places. Perhaps humans found comfort the same way, returning, not because something had changed, but because something hadn't. Outside, the moonlight rested quietly upon the cliffs. Each rock cast soft blue shadows across the grass. Tiny droplets left behind by the evening rain sparkled like scattered diamonds. No one stood outside to admire them. No camera captured them. Yet, they remained beautiful anyway. Beauty never needed an audience. Nature had always understood that. Elias opened the small back door leading toward the garden. Cool air drifted gently inside. The rain had awakened countless fragrances. Fresh rosemary, wild thyme, lavender, mint, wet moss covering ancient stones. The little garden had grown almost by accident over the years. Seeds carried by birds. Flowers planted by visitors long forgotten. Herbs collected during quiet walks through nearby forests. Nothing perfectly planned. Yet everything somehow belonged together. A narrow stone path wound gently between flower beds. The stones themselves had become smooth beneath decades of footsteps. Tiny lanterns lined each side. Not electric. Simple glass lanterns holding small candles. Tonight, only one remained lit. Its tiny flame swayed gently inside the clear glass. Enough to guide. Never enough to overpower the darkness. Sometimes, a little light accomplished more than a great deal of brightness. Elias walked slowly toward the old wooden bench overlooking the sea. Its surface still held tiny drops of rain. He brushed them away with his sleeve. Then sat quietly, The bench faced east, toward tomorrow's sunrise, though dawn remained many hours away. He liked knowing where morning would eventually arrive. There was comfort in certainty. Morning always came, no matter how long the night felt. Above him, the branches of an old maple tree moved softly with the breeze. Thousands of leaves whispered together, each sound almost too gentle to notice. The tree had stood beside the lighthouse longer than Elias himself. Every autumn, its leaves turned brilliant shades of amber, gold, deep crimson, then quietly returned to the earth. Not with sadness, simply completing another season. Nature never feared change. It accepted every season as part of the same beautiful story. A tiny rabbit appeared beneath the garden fence. It paused, lifted its ears, then continued nibbling fresh clover without the slightest concern. The lighthouse had taught even wild creatures that this place held no danger. Only warmth, only quiet, only kindness. Perhaps peace spread farther than people realized. The ocean shimmered beneath the moon. Its surface looked almost like flowing silver. Small ripples traveled lazily across the water, not driven by storms, only guided by distant tides. Far beyond the horizon, somewhere unseen, the moon quietly pulled the sea. Invisible forces, patiently shaping the world. Elias often wondered how many invisible kindnesses shaped people's lives the same way. Words never spoken. Small smiles. Doors quietly held open. Gentle forgiveness. Tiny moments. Changing everything, without ever asking for recognition. Back inside, the grandfather clock continued its faithful rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Every swing of its pendulum seemed slower than the one before. Not because time had changed, because the night itself invited slower breathing, slower thoughts, slower hearts. Elias returned to the fireplace. He carefully placed another cedar log upon the glowing embers. The flames answered with quiet gratitude. Light slowly filled the room once more. Golden reflections danced across the brass lantern hanging above the mantel. Old family photographs glowed warmly beneath the flickering light. Faces from generations long gone, yet somehow still present, not through memory alone, but through everything they had quietly passed forward. Kindness, patience, gentleness, hope. Oliver climbed onto Elias's lap. Without asking, without hesitation, he settled into perfect comfort. His quiet purring returned almost immediately. Steady, gentle, like another heartbeat inside the room. Elias smiled. He stroked the old cat's soft fur. Neither seemed interested in speaking. Words would have added nothing. Everything important had already been understood. Outside, the lighthouse lantern completed another slow circle. Its warm beam swept across sleeping waves, across silent rocks, across peaceful forests, and into the endless night beyond. Still waiting, still guiding, still quietly reminding every traveler that somewhere, no matter how dark the journey became, a gentle light remained awake. End of Part 5a. Brumora Sleep Estor What Part 6a. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. Midnight arrived so quietly, no one would have noticed it had the old grandfather clock not gently announced the hour. 1, 2, 3. Its deep bronze chime echoed softly through the lighthouse. Each note floated upward toward the lantern room, then slowly disappeared into the sleeping night. When the final echo faded, the silence somehow felt even deeper. Not empty, simply peaceful. The fire had become calmer now. Instead of lively flames, soft orange embers glowed beneath the cedar logs. Their warmth spread gently through the room without asking for attention. Tiny blue flames appeared now and then, only for a heartbeat, before melting back into the glowing wood. The lighthouse no longer felt bright. It felt warm. There is a difference. Brightness wakes the eyes. Warmth quiets the heart. Oliver continued sleeping peacefully across Elias's lap. His breathing remained wonderfully slow. Every gentle inhale lifted the soft fur along his sides. Every exhale seemed to melt a little deeper into comfort. Watching him, Elias found himself breathing more slowly too. Nature had a quiet way of sharing calm. The lantern above continued turning. Its enormous crystal lens caught every tiny flicker from the fire below. Golden reflections slowly drifted across the ceiling, like little stars wandering through the lighthouse itself. Outside, the great beam crossed the ocean again. Then again. Then once more. Without ever growing tired. Without ever asking whether anyone still needed its light. Some acts of kindness became beautiful precisely because they expected nothing in return. A soft mist rose from the sea, not heavy enough to hide the cliffs, only enough to soften their outlines. The rocks looked almost dreamlike now. Edges disappeared. Sharp corners became gentle curves. The entire coastline seemed wrapped inside a peaceful blanket of silver fog. The world often became softer when seen through mist. Perhaps people sometimes deserve to be seen that way too. Not only for their sharp edges, but for the quiet kindness hidden beneath them. Elias slowly stood, careful not to wake Oliver. The old cat barely stirred. He simply curled into the warm blanket left behind on the rocking chair. The chair continued moving gently, forward, backward, until it finally rested. Everything eventually found stillness. The lighthouse hallway glowed with only a few small lanterns. Their warm amber light rested upon polished wooden floors. Old brass hooks held raincoats that had not been needed for many months. An umbrella stood quietly beside the door, its handle worn smooth by years of faithful use. Simple things, patient things, objects that never demanded attention, only usefulness. Elias paused beside one old photograph hanging near the staircase. It showed the lighthouse almost 80 years earlier. Snow covered every rooftop. The ocean looked dark and wild. Standing proudly beside the entrance, a young lighthouse keeper smiled toward the camera. His father. The resemblance had become stronger with age. When Elias had been young, he never noticed. Now, each morning reflected another small piece of the man who had taught him nearly everything worth knowing. Not through speeches, not through lessons, simply by living quietly, His father had once said something Elias never forgot. The sea remembers every storm, but it never stops welcoming tomorrow's sunrise. At the time, those words seemed beautiful. Now, they seemed true. Every heart carried old storms. Every life remembered difficult seasons. Yet somehow, morning always arrived again. Not to erase yesterday, only to remind us that life continued. Outside, a family of seals rested upon the lower rocks. Moonlight shimmered softly across their smooth coats. One lifted its head, looked toward the lighthouse, then settled once more, completely unafraid. The sea had taught them which lights brought safety, which places carried peace. Animals often recognized gentle places before people did. Far beyond the shoreline, a single sailboat drifted almost silently beneath the stars. Its white sail barely moved. There was almost no wind now. The boat seemed less like something traveling, and more like something dreaming. A tiny lantern glowed near its bow. Warm, golden, answering the lighthouse from many miles away. Two quiet lights, speaking across an endless ocean. Without words, without hurry. Back inside, the kettle remained warm upon the stove. Steam no longer rose. Only a pleasant warmth lingered inside the iron. The scent of chamomile still floated gently through the kitchen, mixed now with cedar smoke, fresh bread, lavender, and old paper from nearby books. Every room carried its own quiet fragrance. Together, they formed the scent of home. Not one particular smell, but many gentle memories living together. Elias returned upstairs one final time. The lantern room welcomed him once again. He rested both hands upon the smooth brass railing surrounding the great lens. The mechanism hummed softly, almost too quietly to hear. The heartbeat of the lighthouse. Reliable, steady, unchanging. He looked toward the endless horizon. Nothing dramatic waited there. Only darkness, stars, moonlight, and the slow breathing of the Atlantic. Some nights asked for adventure. This night asked only for peace. And peace, Elias believed, was one of life's greatest gifts. He smiled gently, closed his eyes for one slow breath, and listened as the lighthouse continued watching over the sleeping sea. Brumora sleep story part 7a The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The night had reached its deepest hour. It was the quiet part of the night. The hour when the world seemed to pause between yesterday and tomorrow. Cities still existed somewhere beyond the distant hills, but their hurried voices no longer reached the coast. Roads rested. Windows darkened. Even the restless wind seemed content to wander more slowly. Only the lighthouse remained faithfully awake. Its lantern continued its endless journey through the darkness. One graceful circle, followed by another, never missing a single turn. Elias stood beside the great lantern one last time before returning downstairs. He rested his hand upon the warm brass housing that surrounded the light. For decades, he had touched the same place every evening, not because it was necessary, but because small rituals slowly became companions. The brass felt familiar beneath his fingertips. Smooth, comforting, alive with gentle warmth. Almost as though the lighthouse quietly recognized him too. Outside, the sea reflected thousands of tiny stars. Every small ripple carried fragments of the night sky. Looking down from above, it became impossible to tell where heaven ended and the ocean began. Both stretched endlessly. Both carried silence. Both invited wonder without demanding answers. Elias had stopped asking the sea for explanations many years ago. Simply watching it had become enough. The moon slowly drifted westward. Its light softened as a thin ribbon of cloud quietly crossed its face. Nothing dramatic happened. The world simply changed. Little by little. Nature rarely announced its transitions. Autumn arrived one leaf at a time. Morning arrived one shade of blue at a time. Sleep arrived one peaceful breath at a time. Perhaps life's greatest changes always happened quietly. Far below, the tide reached its highest point. Gentle waves climbed carefully over the lower rocks. Each wave carried tiny shells, smooth pieces of sea glass, fragments of old driftwood polished by countless journeys. The ocean never wasted anything. Even broken things became beautiful after enough time. A jagged bottle became smooth sea glass. A fallen tree became driftwood. Storm-worn stones became soft beneath patient waves. Time, given enough kindness, had a remarkable way of healing rough edges. Oliver slowly opened one sleepy eye. He stretched with great determination, as though waking required every muscle in his small body. Then, after deciding the room remained perfectly safe, he yawned enormously, curled into an even tighter circle, and returned to sleep almost immediately. Elias chuckled softly. Cats possessed a remarkable understanding of rest. They never apologized for it, never hurried through it, never considered it wasted time. They simply slept when tired. Perhaps people had once lived that way too. The lighthouse library remained bathed in warm amber light. Rows of old books stood quietly together. Some had crossed oceans. Others had belonged to sailors whose names were now forgotten. Every worn cover carried fingerprints from another lifetime. Every page waited patiently for another reader. Books never hurried either. They waited years, sometimes decades, until the right person finally opened them. Elias selected a small volume of poetry. Its spine had faded from deep green to soft gray. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he enjoyed its comforting weight resting in his hands. There was something peaceful about holding an old book before reading it, almost like greeting an old friend before beginning another conversation. He finally opened to a page marked by a pressed maple leaf. The leaf had turned golden brown over the years. Its delicate shape remained almost perfect. The poem beside it contained only 4 lines. The quiet sea remembers every dawn. The patient stars forget no night. The heart finds home in gentle places, and peace arrives before first light. Elias read the words only once. There was no need to repeat them. Some thoughts settled naturally, like snow upon pine branches. Outside, a lone seagull drifted silently across the moonlit sky. Not searching, not calling, simply gliding upon invisible currents. Its white wings barely moved. The air itself carried it. Watching the bird, Elias wondered if life became lighter whenever people stopped fighting every current. The sea never argued with the moon. The wind never argued with the trees. Everything seemed willing to move together. Only humans often exhausted themselves trying to control every tide. The fire had become wonderfully gentle. Its flames no longer danced. Instead, they glowed quietly among glowing embers. Tiny pieces of cedar occasionally settled with the faintest whisper. The warmth spread evenly through every room. Nothing felt too warm. Nothing felt too cool. Perfect balance. The kind of comfort that almost disappeared because it asked for nothing. Somewhere beyond the western cliffs, a church bell rang once. The sound traveled softly across sleeping forests before reaching the lighthouse. Its echo faded almost immediately into the sea breeze. No urgency. No alarm. Only another quiet reminder that time continued its peaceful journey. Elias smiled. He had long stopped measuring life by clocks. Instead, he measured it by seasons. By sunrise. By rain. By the return of migrating birds. By the first autumn leaf floating quietly onto the garden path. Nature had become his calendar, and it had never once been late. The lantern continued turning above. The ocean continued breathing below. The stars continued shining beyond. And within the quiet heart of the lighthouse, warmth, kindness, and gentle light continued waiting for every tired soul still making its way home. End of Part 7a. Brumora Sleep St. White Part 8a. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The night had become softer than ever. Not darker. Not quieter. Simply softer. It was as though every corner of the coastline had wrapped itself inside an invisible blanket. The sea no longer shimmered brightly beneath the moon. Instead, its surface glowed with a muted silver light that rose and fell with every gentle wave. Nothing sparkled. Nothing demanded attention. Everything simply rested. Inside the lighthouse, the air remained pleasantly warm. The stone walls had absorbed hours of quiet heat from the cedar fire. Every room carried that comforting feeling found only in places that had been loved for many years. Not decorated. Loved. There is a difference. Decoration fills a house. Care fills a home. Elias slowly climbed the staircase once again. Not because anything needed repairing. Not because something had gone wrong. Simply because he enjoyed seeing the lantern one more time before the deepest part of the night. His footsteps echoed gently against the circular stone walls. Each step felt familiar. His body no longer needed to think. It simply remembered. Thousands upon thousands of evenings had taught his feet exactly where every stair waited. Memory, he thought, often lived quietly inside the body long before it remained inside the mind. At the very top, the lantern continued its endless dance. The enormous Fresnel lens rotated so smoothly that it almost seemed weightless. Golden light flowed through crystal glass, across polished brass, across quiet windows covered with tiny traces of sea mist. Each slow rotation painted another circle across the sleeping Atlantic. The lighthouse never became tired. Perhaps because it never worried about tomorrow's work. It simply completed today's. one circle at a time. Elias looked eastward, far beyond the horizon. Darkness still covered the world. Yet somewhere, beyond what any eye could see, morning already existed. The sun had not disappeared. It simply waited patiently for its moment. That thought had always comforted him. Hope often worked the same way. Even when unseen, it still existed. A cool breeze slipped through the tiny ventilation windows. It carried the faint scent of distant pine forests still damp from rain, mixed with salt air. The fragrance became wonderfully clean, fresh enough to feel almost invisible. He took one slow breath, then another. The lungs never hurried. They simply accepted what the night freely offered. Far below, a family of deer quietly emerged from the forest. One by one, they stepped carefully across the moonlit meadow beside the lighthouse. The oldest doe led the way. Behind her followed two younger deer. Finally, a tiny fawn walked carefully after them. Its legs still looked almost too long for its small body. Every few steps, it paused, looked curiously toward the glowing lighthouse, then hurried gently to catch the others. Elias smiled. The meadow had become their favorite resting place each summer. Night after night, generation after generation, the deer returned. Some places quietly earned trust without ever asking for it. The lighthouse garden rested peacefully beneath silver moonlight. Lavender blossoms swayed gently. Tiny white daisies had folded their petals for the night. Rosemary bushes released their calming fragrance whenever the breeze touched them. Even the herbs seemed asleep. Nature knew exactly when to become still. Back downstairs, Oliver had moved again. This time, he had chosen the old braided rug directly in front of the fireplace. His whiskers twitched gently. Perhaps he dreamed of chasing butterflies through summer grass. Or perhaps cats dreamed only of warm sunshine and endless naps. Whatever his dreams contained, they looked wonderfully peaceful. The grandfather clock continued its faithful work. Tick, tick, tick. Its pendulum never rushed toward tomorrow, never lingered inside yesterday. It simply remained completely present inside this very moment. Elias admired that. Perhaps the happiest clocks were the ones that never worried about the next hour. He poured the last cup of warm tea from the kettle. It had cooled slightly now, just enough. The lavender had become softer, the chamomile sweeter. The honey blended perfectly into every sip. He carried the mug toward the small reading chair beside the window. Outside, the moonlight rested gently across the sea. Inside, the fire painted warm golden reflections upon the glass. Two worlds. One cool, one warm, both peaceful. An old knitted cushion rested upon the chair. Its faded blue yarn had become wonderfully soft after decades of use. Elias settled into it slowly. The chair welcomed him with one familiar creak. He opened no book, played no music, spoke no words. Sometimes, the greatest luxury was simply allowing yourself to exist without needing to accomplish anything. The world constantly asked people to become more, Do more. Move faster. Think harder. The lighthouse asked for none of those things. It asked only one question. Can you simply be here? Outside. The ocean answered with another gentle wave. The lantern answered with another circle of light. The stars answered with quiet patience. And somewhere deep within the peaceful rhythm of the night, the heart itself seemed to grow a little lighter, a little quieter, a little closer to perfect rest. End of Part 8a. Brumora sleep estior y Part 9a. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The night continued unfolding, not in great moments, but in countless tiny ones. A single wave arriving upon the shore, a single ember quietly glowing beneath cedar wood, a single leaf drifting gently across the garden path. None of them seemed important alone, yet together they created the peaceful rhythm of the world. Perhaps life itself was built the same way, not from extraordinary days, but from thousands of quiet evenings that slowly shaped the heart. The lighthouse stood exactly as it had for generations. Its white stone walls carried the memory of every season. Spring rains, summer sunlight, autumn winds, winter snow. Each season had left something behind. Tiny marks, soft colors, weathered corners, gentle imperfections. Yet somehow, age had never stolen its beauty. It had only deepened it. Elias remained beside the window. The warm mug rested quietly between his hands. The tea had almost cooled now. Still, he took another slow sip. Not because he was thirsty, because slowing down deserved to be practiced. Every movement became softer when there was no reason to hurry. He placed the mug carefully upon the wooden table. The small sound of ceramic touching would echo gently through the room. Even that tiny sound felt peaceful. Outside, a blanket of mist floated slowly across the sea once again. It did not hide the world. It merely softened it. The cliffs became gentle shadows. The waves became flowing silver ribbons. Even the distant stars looked slightly blurred. The coastline seemed less like a place, and more like a dream slowly unfolding beneath the moon. The lantern continued its graceful journey. Its beam reached across invisible miles of ocean. Somewhere beyond the horizon, perhaps another lighthouse answered. Perhaps another keeper quietly performed the very same evening routine, checking the lamp, watching the tide, listening to the wind. People often imagined they were alone. Yet somewhere, someone else was quietly living almost the same peaceful moment. Oliver slowly lifted his head. For a few seconds, he watched tiny sparks floating upward from the fireplace. One spark drifted higher than the others. It glowed softly, then disappeared. The cat blinked lazily, apparently deciding the spark required no further investigation. He tucked his nose beneath his tail once more. Within moments, his slow breathing returned. Cats never argued with sleep. When sleep arrived, they welcomed it completely. Elias opened the small wooden cabinet beneath the staircase. Inside rested dozens of carefully folded blankets. each one different. One woven from thick Scottish wool, another knitted by a woman who had stayed at the lighthouse many winters ago. One carried tiny blue stripes faded almost white. Another smelled faintly of cedar despite years of careful washing. He chose the oldest blanket. Its edges had become wonderfully soft. Years of use had removed every trace of stiffness. He gently spread it across the rocking chair. Not because anyone needed it tonight. Simply because tomorrow someone might. Kindness often prepared comfort long before comfort became necessary. The ocean breathed deeply. Wave after wave. The tide slowly began retreating from the cliffs. Tiny streams of seawater quietly flowed back toward the Atlantic. Each carried little shells, smooth pebbles, small fragments of seaweed dancing gently in the moonlight. Nothing resisted the tide. Everything trusted its return. Leaving, returning, leaving again. The sea had followed this rhythm for millions of years, never growing impatient, never becoming bored. Faithfulness had its own quiet beauty. Above the lighthouse, the stars slowly shifted across the heavens. No one noticed the movement. It happened far too gradually. Yet hour after hour, the entire sky transformed. The North Star remained steady, patient, reliable. Everything else gently revolved around it. Elias often thought every peaceful life needed something similar. One steady truth, one reliable kindness, one quiet light. Something that remained constant while everything else slowly changed. He walked toward the old globe standing near the bookshelf. Its oceans had faded from bright blue to soft gray. Countries carried names no longer used. Borders had changed. Empires had disappeared. Yet the oceans remained. The mountains remained. The stars above remained. Some things changed constantly. Others quietly endured. Perhaps wisdom meant learning the difference. The fire whispered another gentle crackle. A cedar log slowly settled into glowing embers. Warm orange light filled every corner of the room. No harsh shadows remained. Everything looked softer now. Kinder somehow. Even the old wooden floor seemed to glow beneath the firelight. Every knot in the timber told a story. Every grain carried years of quiet growth. Trees, too, measured life slowly. Far away, the faint sound of another buoy bell drifted across the sleeping water. One clear note, then another, each separated by long moments of peaceful silence. The bell never rushed its song. It simply waited for the sea to answer. The waves always did. Elias closed his eyes. Not to sleep, only to listen. The lighthouse, the fire, the ocean, the wind, Oliver's gentle breathing, his own steady heartbeat. Everything belonged together. Nothing asked for more. Nothing needed less. And somewhere, far beyond the quiet horizon, the first invisible promise of dawn had already begun its gentle journey toward the waiting lighthouse. End of Part 9a. Brumora Sleep STORY Part 10a. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The eastern horizon remained wrapped in darkness. Yet, something had changed. not in the sky, not in the sea, only in the feeling of the night itself. The deepest hours had quietly passed. The world still slept. But somewhere beyond the invisible curve of the earth, morning had already awakened. The lighthouse seemed to know. It continued turning, patiently, faithfully, as though preparing to welcome another day without ever saying goodbye to the night. The fire had settled into a bed of glowing embers. Their warm orange light pulsed softly beneath delicate layers of white ash. Every few moments, a tiny piece of cedar shifted quietly. A small ribbon of golden flame appeared, then slowly disappeared once more. The fire no longer wished to dance. It simply wished to remain warm. There was something deeply comforting about that. Not every season of life required brilliance. Sometimes, steady warmth was enough. Oliver slowly stretched across the braided rug. His paws reached forward. His whiskers twitched gently. Without opening his eyes, he rolled onto his side. The warmth from the fireplace rested gently across his soft orange fur. He looked perfectly content. The old cat had mastered a skill many people spent their entire lives searching for. He knew how to be completely present, not thinking about yesterday, not worrying about tomorrow, simply resting inside this peaceful moment. Elias quietly opened one of the tall windows. Only a few inches. Immediately, fresh ocean air drifted inside. It carried the clean scent of salt water, cool stone, wet pine, and distant wildflowers hidden among the cliffs. The air felt wonderfully alive. Not cold, simply fresh. It gently moved through every room, mixing with cedar smoke and lavender until the entire lighthouse carried the fragrance of both sea and home. Outside, the Atlantic breathed with slow confidence. Gentle waves rolled toward the shore. Each one looked almost identical, yet every wave was completely new. The ocean never repeated itself. It only appeared to. Perhaps people were the same. Every morning they awoke slightly different than the day before, even if they hardly noticed. The lighthouse garden rested beneath moonlight. Tiny droplets still clung to lavender blossoms. Each droplet reflected a miniature version of the moon. Hundreds of tiny moons, scattered among purple flowers. Nature seemed to delight in creating beauty that almost no one would ever see. Not because it expected admiration, but because beauty itself was worthwhile. A small breeze wandered gently through the rosemary bushes. Their fragrance became slightly stronger. The herbs had survived countless winters beside the sea. Strong winds, heavy rain, salt carried from distant storms. Still, every spring, they quietly grew again. Resilience often looked surprisingly gentle. Elias wrapped the old wool blanket a little closer around his shoulders. He walked slowly toward the wooden bench outside. The stone path glistened faintly beneath moonlight. Every familiar step carried another memory. Here, he had planted lavender 20 years ago. There, a young fox had once watched him from behind the roses. Near the old oak tree, a little girl visiting with her grandfather had laughed for nearly an hour while chasing butterflies. The lighthouse remembered people long after they left. Perhaps places carried memories too. The bench overlooked the entire coastline. Tonight, the sea looked almost endless. The mist had nearly disappeared. The stars reflected beautifully upon calm water. No fishing boats crossed the horizon now. No distant lights interrupted the darkness. Only moon, ocean, and sky. 3 quiet companions sharing another peaceful night. Elias sat slowly. The old bench greeted him with its familiar wooden sigh. He smiled. Old things often spoke softly, never loudly. The oldest trees, the oldest books, the oldest friendships. They rarely needed many words. Simply being present was enough. Somewhere high above, a flock of migrating birds crossed silently beneath the stars. Their wings made almost no sound. Only their graceful formation revealed they were there. Thousands of miles still waited ahead. Yet they never questioned the journey. Each bird trusted the one beside it, the one ahead, the one behind. Together, they crossed entire continents. Even the longest journeys became lighter when shared. The lighthouse lantern swept across the ocean again. Its warm golden beam touched the distant waves before disappearing into the night. Then, a few moments later, it returned. Reliable, gentle, endless. No traveler ever thanked the light. The light never expected thanks. Its purpose was simply to shine. Elias often believed kindness worked exactly the same way. The world remained wonderfully still. No clocks needed watching. No schedules required following. No voices asked for attention. Only the quiet rhythm of existence itself. Breathing, waves, stars, fire, wind, everything moving exactly as it should. The moon slowly drifted lower. Its reflection stretched farther across the water, almost reaching the cliffs below the lighthouse. It looked like a glowing path made entirely of silver. Elias knew no one could walk upon it. Yet, he liked imagining tired souls finding comfort simply by looking toward its gentle light. Sometimes, hope didn't need to be reachable, only visible. Behind him, the lighthouse continued glowing. Ahead of him, the ocean continued dreaming. Above him, the stars continued watching. And within the quiet warmth of his own heart, Elias felt something he had learned only after many peaceful years beside the sea. The world did not become beautiful because everything was perfect. It became beautiful because it continued offering quiet moments like this. Night after night, wave after wave, Brumora sleep STOR
breath
after
after
breath.
11A the lighthouse
Patiently
that waited
waiting
for tired souls. For anyone willing
The
to
night
slow
had
down long
entered its
enough
gentlest chapter.
to notice them.
It was no
End
longer
of
the
part
lively
10A.
beginning of evening, nor yet the hopeful promise of dawn. It rested peacefully in between, a quiet bridge connecting darkness with morning. The lighthouse stood upon its cliff, patient as ever. Its white tower glowed softly beneath the fading moon. The great lantern above continued its graceful circle, casting warm golden light across an ocean that seemed almost too peaceful to be real. Elias remained on the old wooden bench. He had long stopped counting the minutes. Out here, time measured itself differently. One slow tide, one passing cloud, one drifting star, one gentle breath after another. Perhaps clocks had been invented for busy people. Nature had never needed them. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before him. The waves no longer seemed separate. They moved together now. One long, endless rhythm, flowing toward the shore, then gently returning home again. The sea never appeared lonely, even when no ships crossed its surface, even when no voices echoed across its waters. It seemed completely comfortable in its own company. That was a rare kind of peace. A faint silver mist floated low across the shoreline. It curled gently around weathered rocks, softened the edges of ancient cliffs, and drifted slowly through the beach grass. Nothing disappeared inside the mist. Everything simply became gentler. The sharpness of the world quietly melted away. Elias often thought forgiveness resembled mist. It did not erase the landscape. It simply softened it. Somewhere beyond the meadow, an owl called once. Its deep, quiet voice drifted through the forest. Then silence returned. Not an empty silence, a full one. The kind of silence filled with tiny unseen lives. Sleeping birds tucked beneath branches. Foxes resting inside warm dens. Rabbits hidden beneath tall grass. Every creature trusting the night to keep them safe until morning. The old maple tree beside the lighthouse swayed almost imperceptibly. Its leaves whispered together. Thousands of tiny conversations, none louder than the breeze itself. A single leaf finally released its branch. It drifted downward slowly, turning once, twice, then gently came to rest upon the stone path. It had not fallen. It had simply arrived exactly where the season intended. Elias watched the leaf for a long moment. Life spent so much effort holding on. Nature often taught the opposite. Leaves trusted autumn. Snow trusted spring. Flowers trusted sunshine. The sea trusted the moon. Nothing resisted the rhythm of becoming. Perhaps the heart rested more easily when it learned that same quiet trust. Behind him, the lighthouse windows glowed warmly. From outside, the building looked almost like a welcoming lantern itself. Every window offered gentle golden light. Every stone reflected years of quiet care. It was impossible to look at the lighthouse without feeling that someone waited inside. Not waiting impatiently. Simply ready. Ready with warm tea. Ready with a blanket. Ready with quiet company. Ready without asking questions. Some homes welcomed people before the door even opened. Oliver finally wandered outside. His paws made no sound upon the old wooden porch. He stretched beneath the moonlight, then gracefully jumped onto the bench beside Elias. Without invitation, without ceremony, he settled comfortably against the old man's side. Warm fur against warm wool. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Sometimes companionship became most meaningful when nothing needed to be said. The breeze shifted slightly. Now it carried another fragrance. Wild jasmine. Somewhere hidden beyond the garden fence. A climbing vine had opened its tiny white blossoms during the night. They released their perfume only after sunset. No audience gathered to admire them. Still, they bloomed exactly as they were meant to. Beauty never delayed itself waiting for applause. Far beyond the horizon, the stars slowly continued their ancient journey. Constellations drifted almost invisibly westward. One by one, the brightest stars approached the edge of the world, not disappearing, only making room for another morning. The sky had repeated this quiet miracle for countless generations. Yet, no sunrise ever became ordinary. The lighthouse lantern turned again. Its beam crossed the calm sea. touched the mist, brushed gently across sleeping cliffs, then continued toward unseen travelers somewhere beyond the darkness. Perhaps no ship needed its guidance tonight. Still, the light shone. Duty performed with love never depended upon being noticed. Elias closed his eyes. The warmth of Oliver beside him, the scent of jasmine, the distant breathing of the Atlantic, the soft turning of the lantern, everything blended together into one peaceful feeling. Not happiness, something deeper. Contentment. The quiet understanding that nothing needed changing. Nothing needed fixing. Nothing needed rushing. This moment, exactly as it was already enough. The world rested. The sea dreamed. The lighthouse watched. And high above, the stars quietly kept their ancient promise to remain beside every sleeping soul until morning gently found them once again. End of Part 11a. Brumora Sleep St. Part 12a. The Lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The longest part of the night had quietly slipped away. No announcement marked its passing. No trumpet sounded. No great change unfolded across the sea. Only those who loved quiet places, those who watched patiently, could sense it. The darkness no longer felt endless. It felt gentle, like the final pages of a favorite story before peaceful sleep. The lighthouse continued standing with quiet dignity upon its weathered cliff. Its white stone tower reflected the fading moonlight. Its lantern never hesitated. Round and round, its warm golden beam continued sweeping across the Atlantic. Every rotation looked identical, yet none of them were truly the same, because with every turn, a different wave shimmered, a different cloud drifted past, a different star reflected upon the sea. Even faithful routines quietly welcomed change. Elias slowly rose from the wooden bench. The blanket rested comfortably around his shoulders. The cool ocean breeze brushed gently across his face. Not enough to chill him, only enough to remind him that the world beyond the warm lighthouse still breathed peacefully. He placed one hand upon the weathered railing overlooking the cliffs. Its wood had become silky smooth after decades of salt air, rain, sunlight, and countless quiet evenings. Some materials became stronger through weather. Perhaps hearts did too. Far below, the ocean met the rocks with endless patience. Each wave rolled forward, touched the ancient stones, then quietly slipped away again. Never frustrated, never disappointed. The rocks did not resist. The sea did not insist. They simply greeted each other. Again and again. For centuries, there was no winner, only harmony. A faint ribbon of cloud drifted across the moon. Its silver light softened even more. The entire coastline seemed wrapped inside delicate blue velvet. The cliffs, the lighthouse, the sleeping meadow. Everything became part of one peaceful landscape. Nothing stood apart. Everything belonged. Oliver wandered slowly through the garden. His tiny paws barely disturbed the dew resting upon the grass. He paused beside a patch of lavender, lowered his nose, then continued toward the stone wall overlooking the sea. Cats rarely hurried. Even curiosity had its own gentle pace. He climbed onto the wall with graceful ease, sat quietly, and began watching the ocean, as though he too had become one of its old guardians. Inside the lighthouse, the grandfather clock quietly continued measuring moments. Tick, tick, tick. Its steady rhythm blended perfectly with the distant breathing of the sea. Neither sound interrupted the other. Together, they formed a gentle lullaby older than memory itself. Elias returned indoors. The warmth embraced him once more. The fire had become a glowing circle of deep orange embers. Only an occasional tiny flame appeared between the cedar logs. The room smelled wonderfully comforting. Cedar, lavender, old books, fresh bread, warm tea, and just the faintest trace of sea salt drifting through the open window. Home, he thought, was often recognized by scent before sight. He slowly climbed the spiral staircase one final time. Each familiar step carried him toward the lantern room. The stone walls reflected tiny circles of warm light. The brass handrail glowed softly beneath the lantern's reflection. Everything seemed to welcome him. Not because he owned the lighthouse, because he belonged there. There is a quiet difference. Owning something fills the hands. Belonging somewhere fills the heart. The great Fresnel lens turned gracefully before him. Its polished crystal scattered warm beams across every wall. Elias gently adjusted one small brass lever. Not because it required correction, simply because tradition asked him to check it once more before dawn. Everything remained perfect. The gears whispered. The bearings turned effortlessly. The flame burned steadily. Reliability, he often believed, was one of love's quietest forms. He looked toward the eastern horizon. At first, nothing seemed different. Then, almost imperceptibly, the darkest edge of the sky became just a little softer. Not brighter, only softer. Night itself seemed to smile. Morning had not yet arrived, but it had begun its journey. The first hint of tomorrow always appeared with remarkable gentleness. A distant fishing buoy rang quietly once. The sound drifted through the still air before disappearing into the endless Atlantic. Elias listened carefully, then smiled. Even the sea seemed to whisper, "Another peaceful night has nearly found its ending." He rested both hands upon the cool brass railing, closed his eyes, took one long, slow, comfortable breath, and for a few beautiful moments. The lighthouse, the ocean, the stars, the quiet wind, and his own peaceful heart all seemed to breathe together as one. End of part 12a. Brumora sleep estior what part 13a. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The eastern sky had begun its quiet transformation. Not into daylight. Not yet. Only into possibility. The darkness that had wrapped the world for so many peaceful hours was becoming softer. Like ink slowly dissolving into clear water. A deep navy blue appeared above the horizon. Then, a quieter shade of blue. So gentle that only those who watched with patience would notice. The lighthouse had witnessed this silent miracle every morning for more than a century. Yet somehow, it never became ordinary. Elias remained inside the lantern room. He stood without moving. His hands rested lightly upon the polished brass railing surrounding the great lens. The lantern continued its slow rotation. Its warm beam still crossed the sea. But with every passing minute, the darkness became a little less dependent upon it. The lighthouse never feared that moment. Its purpose was never to compete with the sunrise. Its purpose was simply to guide until the sun quietly took over. There was wisdom in knowing when to shine, and wisdom in knowing when to gently step aside. Outside, the Atlantic seemed to awaken without making a sound. The waves looked different now. Still gentle, still slow. Yet their silver surface had begun reflecting faint shades of blue instead of black. The sea had not changed. Only the light had. Perhaps. People often changed the same way. Sometimes all they needed was a little more light. A gentle breeze wandered through the meadow. It carried the cool fragrance of wet grass, fresh earth, lavender, and distant pine trees still holding tiny drops of rain upon their needles. The world smelled wonderfully clean, as though the night itself had quietly washed every leaf, every flower, every stone, preparing everything for another peaceful day. Oliver sat proudly atop the old stone wall, his tail wrapped neatly around his paws. His bright amber eyes followed the first tiny birds beginning to stir within the nearby forest. One robin hopped onto the garden fence, then another. Neither sang yet. They simply watched the morning arrive. Even birds, it seemed, preferred quiet before conversation. The old maple tree beside the lighthouse barely moved now. The wind had almost completely rested. Its thousands of leaves hung peacefully above the garden path. Tiny droplets clinging to each leaf reflected the growing blue sky. Every drop became a tiny mirror. Every mirror held another morning. Nature had countless ways of repeating beauty, yet none of them ever felt repetitive. Elias slowly descended the spiral staircase. The lighthouse remained wonderfully quiet. The grandfather clock still marked each passing second. Tick, tick, tick. Its rhythm blended naturally with the soft crackling embers still glowing inside the fireplace. The fire had almost finished its work. Only a quiet warmth remained. No flames. Only glowing orange light beneath gentle white ash. The room itself felt sleepy, as though it too had earned a little rest. He entered the kitchen. The old copper kettle remained upon the stove, still slightly warm. He filled it once more with fresh spring water collected from the stone well behind the lighthouse. The water flowed quietly into the kettle. Cool, clear, simple. There was something deeply satisfying about repeating small morning rituals. Not because they changed life dramatically, because they gently reminded life to slow down. Soon, steam began rising once again. Soft curls floated upward through golden morning shadows. Chamomile leaves settled gently into the teapot. Fresh mint followed. Then, only one small spoonful of honey. Exactly as always. Some mornings needed nothing new. Only familiar comfort. The first bird finally sang. Its clear little melody drifted through the open kitchen window. Another answered from somewhere beyond the garden. Then another. Soon, tiny voices filled the quiet forest. Not loudly. Never all at once. Each bird waited patiently before adding its own gentle note. Together, they welcomed the morning. No conductor guided them. Nature already knew the music. Elias carried his tea outside once more. This time, the wooden bench looked different. Not because it had changed. Because the growing morning light revealed details hidden during the night. Tiny lines within the weathered wood. Small patches of green moss growing beneath one armrest. Little scratches left behind by countless seasons. Nothing perfect. Everything beautiful. Far out across the Atlantic, the first faint ribbon of soft gold appeared along the horizon. It was almost impossible to notice at first. A whisper of light. Nothing more. The stars closest to the east quietly disappeared. Not all at once. One by one. Without farewell. Without sadness. They had simply completed another night's gentle work. The lighthouse lantern continued shining. Still faithfully turning. Still sending its warm golden beam across the sea. For just a little while longer. Its work was almost complete. Yet it showed no impatience. No relief. No pride. It simply continued. One final peaceful circle. Then another. Waiting patiently. For the sunrise that always arrived. Exactly when it was meant to. Brumora sleep STORY Part 14a The Lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The first light of dawn did not arrive like a curtain rising. It arrived like a whisper. Slowly. Patiently. Almost shyly. The eastern horizon held a thin line of pale gold that gently widened with every passing breath. Above it, soft shades of lavender melted into powder blue. Higher still, the last deep colors of night quietly lingered, reluctant to leave. The sky was not changing all at once. It was remembering how to become morning. The lighthouse lantern still turned faithfully. Its warm golden beam crossed the ocean one graceful circle at a time. Yet now, its light blended gently with the growing colors of dawn. Neither one overpowered the other. The lantern welcomed the sunrise, just as the sunrise quietly honored the lantern that had guarded the sea throughout the night. There was no competition between them, only gratitude. The night had done its work. Now morning would continue the journey. Elias stood beside the eastern window. His hands rested around the warm teacup. The gentle steam curled upward, disappearing into the cool morning air drifting through the open window. He watched the horizon without expectation. He had seen thousands of sunrises, yet every single one carried something quietly different. Some mornings arrived beneath clouds, some through rain, some wrapped in mist, others beneath perfectly clear skies. The sunrise never repeated itself, and perhaps neither did hope. Below the lighthouse, the Atlantic had begun reflecting soft colors never seen during the night. Pale blue, warm silver, hints of rose, gentle gold. The ocean looked less like glass now, and more like silk slowly unfolding toward the horizon. Every wave carried another ribbon of color. Each ripple quietly painted its own small masterpiece before disappearing forever. Beauty, Elias thought, often lasted only a moment. That never made it less beautiful. The birds had fully awakened. Their songs drifted from every corner of the forest. Robins, finches, sparrows, wrens, each voice wonderfully different, none trying to sing louder than another. Together, they created a melody too natural to ever become ordinary. The lighthouse listened quietly. Even stone walls, it seemed, could appreciate music. Oliver stretched again. This time, he wandered through the garden with slow confidence. Morning dew sparkled around his paws. He paused beside the lavender bushes, then gently rubbed against the weathered wooden fence. His soft orange fur caught the first rays of dawn. For one brief moment, he seemed to glow, like another little sunrise quietly walking through the garden. The old maple tree welcomed the morning with gentle movement. Its leaves shimmered softly as sunlight slowly touched their edges. Tiny droplets hanging beneath each leaf became little crystals of light. One by one, they slipped quietly to the ground. The grass accepted every drop without complaint. Nothing in nature ever wasted what another had given. Elias stepped outside. The stone path still held the coolness of night beneath his boots. Fresh air filled his lungs. It tasted wonderfully clean. Salt from the sea, moist earth, wildflowers, fresh pine. Morning itself seemed to have a fragrance, one impossible to bottle, one impossible to own, only to experience. He walked slowly toward the cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The lighthouse cast its long morning shadow across the meadow behind him. Ahead, the ocean stretched endlessly toward the growing light. The horizon no longer divided sea and sky. Instead, they gently blended together. almost as though the world itself had forgotten where one ended and the other began. Far away, a small fishing boat appeared. Its white sail slowly caught the first breeze of morning. No engine disturbed the quiet. Only canvas, wind, and water. The boat moved with remarkable grace, not pushing against the sea, moving with it. Elias smiled. The oldest ways often remained the gentlest. Behind him, the lighthouse lantern continued turning. Its work would soon be complete. In another little while, the daylight would become bright enough that ships no longer needed its beam. Then, the great light would quietly rest until evening returned. There was peace in finishing honest work. No applause, no celebration. Simply the quiet satisfaction of knowing something good had been done. The first edge of the sun finally appeared. A tiny curve of warm golden light rose above the Atlantic. Immediately, the ocean answered. Thousands of tiny reflections danced across every wave. The cliffs glowed softly. The lighthouse walls became bright white once more. The garden awakened completely. Even the old wooden bench seemed warmer beneath the new light. Morning had arrived. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Exactly as it always had. Slowly. Patiently. Beautifully. Elias removed his cap, closed his eyes for one peaceful moment, and quietly whispered the same words he had spoken to every sunrise for more years than he could remember. Thank you for another gentle morning. The sea answered with another soft wave. The birds answered with another joyful song. The lighthouse answered with one final graceful turn of its lantern. And somewhere deep within his peaceful heart, Elias knew that another beautiful day had begun, exactly as it was always meant to. End of part 14a. Brumora sleep estior y part 15a. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The sun continued its slow climb above the Atlantic. It did not rush into the sky. It rose with quiet confidence, as though it had all the time in the world. Soft golden light spread gently across the ocean. The silver waves slowly became blue. The blue became sapphire. And near the shore, the clear water revealed smooth stones resting peacefully beneath its surface. Nothing had changed overnight. Only the light had returned to show what had always been there. The lighthouse lantern completed another graceful turn. Then another. Its golden beam grew softer, almost invisible beneath the strengthening daylight. For the first time since sunset, the lantern no longer stood alone. Morning had become its companion. Elias reached toward the polished brass controls. With slow, practiced hands, he gently disengaged the great rotating mechanism. The enormous Fresnel lens gradually slowed. Its steady circle became smaller, slower, until at last, it came peacefully to rest. No sudden stop. Only a quiet ending. The lighthouse had faithfully watched over another night. Now, it trusted the day to continue where it had gently left off. The room felt strangely peaceful without the moving beam. Sunlight entered through every glass panel instead. Tiny rainbows danced across the wooden floor where morning light passed through the crystal lens. The great lantern had become something entirely different. No longer a guide for ships. Now, simply a beautiful window welcoming the day. Elias smiled. Purpose changed with every season. That never made it less meaningful. He opened the lantern room windows wider. Fresh morning air flowed through the tower. The smell of salt, pine, fresh grass, and wild roses filled every corner. Far below, the cliffs echoed softly with the cries of seabirds beginning another day above the Atlantic. White gulls circled gracefully upon invisible currents of warm air rising from the rocks. Their wings barely moved. The wind carried them effortlessly. Oliver appeared at the top of the staircase. He blinked once, twice, then wandered into the lantern room as though inspecting the morning himself. He paused beside the great lens, sat quietly, and looked toward the bright horizon. The sunlight reflected warmly inside his amber eyes. For a moment, the old cat seemed almost golden. The lighthouse itself looked wonderfully different in daylight. Its white walls glowed against the deep blue sea. Tiny climbing vines covered part of the western wall. Their green leaves shimmered beneath the morning sun. Small white flowers opened slowly, welcoming the warmth after the cool night. Nature never hurried its awakening. Every blossom opened only when ready. Elias descended the spiral staircase once more. Each familiar step felt lighter beneath the growing daylight. The warm stone walls reflected soft golden colors now instead of firelight. The grandfather clock continued its patient rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Morning never interrupted its work. Time remained faithful regardless of sunlight or darkness. Downstairs, the kitchen had become bright and cheerful. Sunlight streamed through the eastern windows. Dust particles floated gently within the warm beams. Each tiny particle danced lazily through the air, almost like miniature stars refusing to disappear after sunrise. The kettle still rested quietly upon the stove. Steam no longer rose. Only warmth remained. Elias opened the front door. The lighthouse greeted the new day completely. The meadow stretched peacefully toward the forest. Wildflowers gently nodded beneath the breeze. Butterflies had begun their slow morning flight among the lavender. Honeybees quietly visited rosemary blossoms. Every tiny creature resumed its work. Not because someone commanded it, because morning naturally invited life forward. A pair of rabbits emerged carefully from beneath the old stone fence. They paused, their noses twitching curiously, seeing Elias standing peacefully beside the garden. They continued nibbling fresh clover without fear. The lighthouse had taught generations of woodland creatures that kindness could become part of a place. Safety, like warmth, could quietly spread far out across the Atlantic. The little fishing boat Elias had noticed earlier moved steadily toward deeper water. Its white sail now shone brilliantly beneath the morning sun. The boat looked tiny against the endless sea. Yet, it moved with complete confidence. Not because the ocean was small, because the sailors trusted it. Courage, Elias believed, was often simply another name for quiet trust. He walked toward the cliff one final time. The ocean sparkled brilliantly now. Thousands upon thousands of tiny reflections shimmered across the waves. The world looked awake, alive, hopeful. Yet, the peaceful feeling of the night had not disappeared. It had simply become part of the morning. Perhaps true peace did not belong only to darkness. Perhaps it could quietly follow us into daylight too. Elias placed one hand upon the weathered stone wall overlooking the sea. He closed his eyes. The warm sunlight rested gently across his face. The breeze carried the scent of the Atlantic. Birdsong drifted softly through the air. Behind him, the lighthouse stood silently, its night watch complete. Ahead, a beautiful new day waited patiently, and within his heart, there remained the same quiet certainty he had carried for so many years. No matter how long the night, no matter how rough the sea, there would always be another. Brumora sleep estior y part 15a the lighthouse that waited for tired souls. The sun continued its slow climb above the Atlantic. It did not rush into the sky. It rose with quiet confidence, as though it had all the time in the world. Soft golden light spread gently across the ocean. The silver waves slowly became blue. The blue became sapphire. And near the shore, the clear water revealed smooth stones resting peacefully beneath its surface. Nothing had changed overnight. Only the light had returned to show what had always been there. The lighthouse lantern completed another graceful turn. Then another. Its golden beam grew softer, almost invisible beneath the strengthening daylight. For the first time since sunset, the lantern no longer stood alone. Morning had become its companion. Elias reached toward the polished brass controls. With slow, practiced hands, he gently disengaged the great rotating mechanism. The enormous Fresnel lens gradually slowed. Its steady circle became smaller, slower, until at last, it came peacefully to rest. No sudden stop, only a quiet ending. The lighthouse had faithfully watched over another night. Now, it trusted the day to continue where it had gently left off. The room felt strangely peaceful without the moving beam. Sunlight entered through every glass panel instead. Tiny rainbows danced across the wooden floor where morning light passed through the crystal lens. The great lantern had become something entirely different. No longer a guide for ships. Now, simply a beautiful window welcoming the day. Elias smiled. Purpose changed with every season. That never made it less meaningful. He opened the lantern room windows wider. Fresh morning air flowed through the tower. The smell of salt, pine, fresh grass, and wild roses filled every corner. Far below, the cliffs echoed softly with the cries of seabirds beginning another day above the Atlantic. White gulls circled gracefully upon invisible currents of warm air rising from the rocks. Their wings barely moved. The wind carried them effortlessly. Oliver appeared at the top of the staircase. He blinked once, twice, then wandered into the lantern room as though inspecting the morning himself. He paused beside the great lens, sat quietly, and looked toward the bright horizon. The sunlight reflected warmly inside his amber eyes. For a moment, the old cat seemed almost golden. The lighthouse itself looked wonderfully different in daylight. Its white walls glowed against the deep blue sea. Tiny climbing vines covered part of the western wall. Their green leaves shimmered beneath the morning sun. Small white flowers opened slowly, welcoming the warmth after the cool night. Nature never hurried its awakening. Every blossom opened only when ready. Elias descended the spiral staircase once more. Each familiar step felt lighter beneath the growing daylight. The warm stone walls reflected soft golden colors now instead of firelight. The grandfather clock continued its patient rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Morning never interrupted its work. Time remained faithful regardless of sunlight or darkness. Downstairs, the kitchen had become bright and cheerful. Sunlight streamed through the eastern windows. Dust particles floated gently within the warm beams. Each tiny particle danced lazily through the air, almost like miniature stars refusing to disappear after sunrise. The kettle still rested quietly upon the stove. Steam no longer rose. Only warmth remained. Elias opened the front door. The lighthouse greeted the new day completely. The meadow stretched peacefully toward the forest. Wildflowers gently nodded beneath the breeze. Butterflies had begun their slow morning flight among the lavender. Honeybees quietly visited rosemary blossoms. Every tiny creature resumed its work. Not because someone commanded it, because morning naturally invited life forward. A pair of rabbits emerged carefully from beneath the old stone fence. They paused, their noses twitching curiously, seeing Elias standing peacefully beside the garden. They continued nibbling fresh clover without fear. The lighthouse had taught generations of woodland creatures that kindness could become part of a place. Safety, like warmth, could quietly spread far out across the Atlantic. The little fishing boat Elias had noticed earlier moved steadily toward deeper water. Its white sail now shone brilliantly beneath the morning sun. The boat looked tiny against the endless sea. Yet, it moved with complete confidence. Not because the ocean was small, because the sailors trusted it. Courage, Elias believed, was often simply another name for quiet trust. He walked toward the cliff one final time. The ocean sparkled brilliantly now. Thousands upon thousands of tiny reflections shimmered across the waves. The world looked awake, alive, hopeful. Yet, the peaceful feeling of the night had not disappeared. It had simply become part of the morning. Perhaps true peace did not belong only to darkness. Perhaps it could quietly follow us into daylight too. Elias placed one hand upon the weathered stone wall overlooking the sea. He closed his eyes. The warm sunlight rested gently across his face. The breeze carried the scent of the Atlantic. Birdsong drifted softly through the air. Behind him, the lighthouse stood silently, its night watch complete. Ahead, a beautiful new day waited patiently, and within his heart, there remained the same quiet certainty he had carried for so many years. No matter how long the night, no matter how rough the sea, there would always be another. Brumora asleep Estior Y Part 16a The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. Morning unfolded across the coastline with remarkable gentleness. Nothing hurried. Nothing demanded attention. The sunlight simply continued its quiet journey, touching the cliffs, the meadow, the old stone walls, until finally it reached the lighthouse windows. Golden light slipped across polished wooden floors. It climbed gently along white stone walls. It rested upon old books, sleeping blankets, and the quiet rocking chair beside the fireplace. The house itself seemed to awaken with a peaceful smile. The fire had finally become still. Only soft gray ash remained. Yet the room continued holding its comforting warmth. Stone walls remembered. Wood remembered. Even the old woven rugs seemed to remember the night's gentle fire. Warmth, like kindness, often remained long after its source had quietly disappeared. Elias opened every window. Fresh Atlantic air wandered happily through each room. Curtains lifted softly. The scent of lavender drifted toward the hallway. Chamomile still lingered gently inside the teapot. Outside, rosemary shimmered beneath morning dew. The lighthouse breathed, not with lungs, but with open windows, moving air, and quiet light. Oliver wandered slowly from room to room. He visited each familiar place as though greeting old friends. First, the library. He rubbed gently against the lowest bookshelf. Then, the kitchen. He paused beneath the breakfast table where countless peaceful mornings had quietly passed. Finally, he climbed onto the wide eastern windowsill. From there, he watched the ocean exactly as he had watched it every morning for many years. Cats rarely searched for new happiness. They simply appreciated familiar happiness more deeply. The ocean looked wonderfully awake now. Morning sunlight danced across thousands of tiny waves. Each ripple carried golden reflections that appeared, disappeared, then returned again. The Atlantic never stood still. Yet somehow, it always looked peaceful. Movement itself did not create restlessness. Only resistance did. The sea accepted every wave. Perhaps that was its greatest secret. A gentle breeze carried the sound of distant church bells from a small fishing village hidden beyond the southern cliffs. The bells rang softly across the water. Not loudly, not urgently, simply welcoming another ordinary morning. Ordinary, Elias thought, was one of life's greatest gifts. Many people searched endlessly for extraordinary moments, while quietly overlooking the beauty of peaceful ordinary days. Near the garden gate, tiny white butterflies floated lazily among blooming flowers. They moved without hurry, choosing one blossom, then another. Sunlight passed gently through their delicate wings. They looked almost transparent, fragile, yet completely free. Sometimes, the lightest things traveled the farthest. Elias stepped into the small vegetable garden behind the lighthouse. Tomato vines climbed neatly along wooden supports. Fresh basil filled the air with its sweet fragrance. Mint leaves sparkled beneath dew. Tiny strawberries hid beneath broad green leaves. Nothing here had been planted for perfection, only for nourishment, only for sharing. Every harvest eventually found its way to neighbors, passing fishermen, travelers, or lonely visitors seeking quiet company beside the sea. The garden had never learned the meaning of selfishness. He picked a single ripe tomato, still warm from yesterday's sunshine. He smiled softly. Nature always rewarded patience. No amount of pulling could hurry fruit toward ripeness. No amount of worrying could make flowers bloom sooner. Everything beautiful arrived exactly when ready. The lighthouse bell hanging beside the entrance moved gently with the breeze. Its small bronze clapper touched the side once. A delicate note floated into the morning air. Not loud enough to announce itself, only soft enough to become part of the wind. Some sounds belong to silence rather than interrupting it. Far offshore, a family of dolphins surfaced briefly beside the fishing boat. Smooth silver backs appeared above the water. One graceful leap, then another. Within moments, they disappeared beneath the waves once more. The fishermen smiled. No cameras appeared. No excitement followed. Along this coastline, such moments were simply accepted as quiet gifts from the sea. Elias leaned against the old stone wall surrounding the garden. Sunlight warmed the rough surface beneath his hand. Tiny patches of moss glowed bright emerald green after the night's rain. Even old stones welcomed another day. Nothing complained about growing older here. Age simply became another kind of beauty. High above, the lighthouse tower stood peacefully against the endless blue sky. Its lantern rested now, silent, patient, waiting without impatience for another evening. It never worried about when night would return. It simply trusted the rhythm of the earth. Perhaps trust itself was the deepest form of peace. Elias looked toward the horizon one last time before beginning another quiet day. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before him. Bright, calm, hopeful. The lighthouse behind him rested. The garden bloomed. Oliver slept once again in the sunshine. And somewhere deep inside the quiet rhythm of another beautiful morning, life gently whispered its oldest promise. There is always another peaceful day, waiting, just beyond the night. End of part 16a. Brumora sleep esteur what part 17a. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls. Morning settled gently over the coastline. The world was fully awake now. Yet nothing felt hurried. The waves still arrived one by one. The breeze still wandered through the cliffs. The birds still sang as though they had nowhere more important to be. Even the sunlight seemed unhurried. It slowly climbed across the white walls of the lighthouse, warming each stone, one after another. The lighthouse had become wonderfully quiet. Without the turning lantern, without the whispering gears, it almost seemed to be sleeping. Yet even in rest, it remained watchful. Some guardians protected through action, others simply through their presence. The lighthouse had mastered both. Elias unlocked the small wooden gate leading toward the narrow path that curved around the cliffs. Every morning, he walked this path, not because anyone expected him to, not because duty demanded it, because the sea always had something new to show. The same path, the same cliffs, the same ocean, yet somehow, never the same morning. Oliver followed several steps behind. Not too close, not too far. Like an old friend who understood that silence could also be shared. Occasionally, he stopped to investigate a butterfly or a patch of warm sunlight, then quietly caught up again. Neither one spoke. Neither one needed to. Years of companionship had made conversation unnecessary. The cliff path overlooked endless blue water. Wild grasses swayed softly beside smooth stone. Tiny purple flowers pushed bravely through cracks in the ancient rock. Their roots found life where almost none seemed possible. Elias knelt beside one blossom. It was no larger than the tip of his thumb. Yet, it bloomed with complete confidence. It never wondered whether someone would notice it. It simply became exactly what it had been created to become. There was quiet wisdom in that. Far below, the sea had become wonderfully clear. Through the shallow water, smooth stones rested peacefully beneath gentle waves. Small fish moved together like drifting silver ribbons. Sunlight reached all the way to the sandy bottom. Nothing hid. Everything simply belonged. A family of sea otters floated peacefully near the rocky shoreline. Wrapped in strands of kelp, they drifted gently with the tide. One tiny pup rested comfortably upon its mother's chest, completely relaxed, completely safe. The mother barely moved. She simply floated, allowing the ocean to carry them both. Sometimes, the safest place in the world was simply being held. The breeze carried another familiar fragrance. Fresh bread. Someone in the small fishing village beyond the cliffs had begun baking. Warm yeast, butter, and toasted oats drifted gently through the morning air. The smell mixed beautifully with salt water and wild herbs. Morning possessed its own quiet recipe, one that no kitchen could perfectly recreate. Elias reached the highest point of the cliff. Here, the entire coastline stretched before him. The lighthouse behind, the Atlantic ahead, rolling green hills to the north, a sleepy fishing village to the south. Everything looked wonderfully balanced. No skyscrapers, no crowded roads, no rushing crowds, only simple life, living quietly beside the sea. He sat upon an old weathered stone that had overlooked the ocean for countless generations. The surface had become perfectly smooth beneath decades of wind and rain, perhaps even centuries. Who had sat here before him? Old fishermen? Travelers? Children? Lighthouse keepers long forgotten? The stone remembered. even if history no longer did. Above him, clouds drifted lazily across the endless blue sky. Soft white shapes slowly changing with the breeze. One resembled a sailing ship, another a sleeping whale, another nothing at all. Clouds never tried to remain the same. They accepted change gracefully. Perhaps people found change difficult because they forgot they too belonged to nature. Oliver climbed carefully beside Elias. Without asking permission, he curled into the warm sunshine resting upon the old stone. Within moments, his eyes slowly closed. Another peaceful nap. Another perfect decision. Cats measured successful days differently than humans. A warm place. A full stomach. A trusted companion nearby. Perhaps that was already enough. The lighthouse bell rang softly behind them as the morning breeze passed through the tower. One clear note, gentle enough to become part of the landscape itself. Elias listened, then smiled. The sound carried no urgency, only reassurance. The lighthouse remained. The sea remained. The sky remained. And as long as those three faithful friends stood together, the world would always feel a little safer, a little slower, a little more peaceful. He looked once more toward the endless Atlantic, took one long, calm breath, and allowed the quiet beauty of another ordinary morning to settle gently inside his heart. Brumora Sleep Story Part 18 A Final, The Lighthouse That Waited for Tired Souls. The morning had fully arrived. The sun now stood gently above the Atlantic, not high enough to feel warm, only high enough to wrap the entire coastline in soft golden light. The lighthouse shone quietly against the endless blue sky. Its white stone walls reflected the sunlight with quiet grace. The great lantern above rested peacefully, its night's work complete. It no longer needed to shine. The world itself had become light. Elias stood before the old lighthouse one final time. For many years, every morning had begun exactly like this. One slow breath, one look toward the sea, one quiet smile. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary. Yet, looking back, he realized those simple mornings had become the richest part of his life. Not because remarkable things had happened, because peaceful things had happened. Again, and again, and again. Oliver rubbed gently against Elias's boots. His soft purr became almost impossible to separate from the distant rhythm of the ocean. The old man smiled. He bent slowly, scratched beneath Oliver's chin, and whispered softly, "Thank you, my old friend." Oliver answered the only way cats ever truly did. He closed his eyes, completely trusting the hand that had comforted him through countless seasons. The lighthouse garden glowed beneath the gentle sunshine. Lavender swayed softly. Wild roses opened completely. Honeybees wandered lazily from blossom to blossom. Butterflies drifted through warm morning air. The rosemary released its familiar fragrance. Fresh mint sparkled beneath tiny drops of dew. Everything alive, yet wonderfully peaceful. Nothing rushed to bloom. Nothing hurried toward tomorrow. Everything simply became exactly what it was meant to become. Far below, the Atlantic stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Ships continued their journeys. Fishing boats disappeared into distant blue water. Seabirds circled above gentle waves. The tides continued arriving, leaving, returning again, exactly as they always had. The sea never promised calm forever. It only promised movement. And somehow, that was enough. Elias slowly entered the lighthouse once more. Sunlight filled every room now. The library glowed warmly. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and tea. The rocking chair rested quietly beside the cold fireplace. The grandfather clock continued its faithful rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Its steady heartbeat echoed softly through the peaceful home. Time moved forward, without fear, without regret. Simply forward. He climbed the spiral staircase one final time. Not because anything needed checking, only because some places deserved one last grateful glance. The lantern room welcomed him with golden morning light. The great Fresnel lens stood completely still, crystal clear, silent, beautiful. He gently rested his hand upon the polished brass. Warm from the morning sun, not from the lantern flame. He smiled. Every night eventually becomes morning. Every storm eventually becomes memory. Every journey eventually becomes home. Looking across the Atlantic, he quietly remembered his father's words. The sea remembers every storm, but it never stops welcoming tomorrow's sunrise. Only now, after so many peaceful years, did he truly understand? Peace was never the absence of difficult days. Peace was choosing to greet another sunrise. Despite remembering every storm, a gentle breeze drifted through the open lantern windows. It carried the scent of salt, pine, lavender, fresh earth, and sunshine warming the cliffs. Elias closed his eyes. One last slow breath. One last quiet moment. One last beautiful silence. Then, very softly, he whispered toward the sea, "May every tired traveler find their way home." The Atlantic answered with a gentle wave. The birds answered with joyful morning song. The lighthouse answered with quiet stillness. And somewhere, far beyond the endless horizon, another traveler continued sailing safely beneath the bright new day. The lighthouse would stand here tomorrow, and the day after that. Long after Elias himself became only another peaceful memory carried gently by the sea breeze. Its light would continue welcoming strangers. Its walls would continue offering warmth. Its quiet presence would continue reminding weary hearts that somewhere in this vast world, there would always be a place where no one hurried them. A place where silence felt kind. A place where the ocean whispered instead of shouted. A place where the stars patiently waited each evening, only to gently hand the sky back to the sunrise. And perhaps, as you slowly drift closer to sleep, You, too, may imagine that lighthouse, standing peacefully upon its quiet cliff, its windows glowing warmly, its garden blooming beside the sea, an old man smiling gently from the doorway, an orange cat sleeping peacefully in the morning sunshine, the endless Atlantic breathing softly below, the wind carrying lavender through the air. Everything calm, everything safe, everything exactly where it belongs. So now, there is nothing left to think about, nothing left to solve, nothing left to carry, only the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. Slowly in, gently out, as peaceful as the tide, as steady as the lighthouse, as endless as the sea. Sleep can come now, softly, naturally, without effort, and somewhere beyond your dreams, the lighthouse will still be there, patiently waiting, whenever you wish to return. Crescent Moon. End of story. The lighthouse that waited for tired souls.